today about communications. I am a communicator, and I've worked a lot with leaders, and a lot of leaders really suck at communications. And so what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to talk to my topic, but I really want to throw a Web 2.0 lifeline to communicators so that they can feel a little bit better about themselves, a little bit more able to communicate and frankly do themselves a favor and those who they would presume to lead. Web 2.0, in my terms, a place where the personal computing has been brought to an end in favor of collaborative computing. The me has become the we. Into that space has been ushered a whole bunch of really interesting things that can do wondrous things for me as a communicator. They can significantly broaden the spectrum of tools that I can use. So that's my definition, for what it's worth, of 2.0. So let's consider an experience that I had some years ago in Canada. I was asked to moderate a conference, or be one of the moderators at a conference. I'm sitting at the top table, and the head of a Fortune 100 company was speaking, and he went on for 45 minutes, and he was truly awful. And an anonymous napkin was passed around the table which said, "I have lost the will to live." So that's really why I'm here. It's why I want to make a plea, a passionate plea for leaders to get with the program. They need to do a little bit better. So onwards and upwards. What do people want to know nowadays in organizations and in companies? Well, I think there's a variety of questions that they're probably asking. Various things from, why am I having to use this new expenses system, through to why are we always talking about safety, to why has our largest competitor just bought us, and will my job be safe? Now, you see what I did there? I took you down the golden Abraham Maslow hierarchy of need there, from the top all the way to the bottom rung. And let's talk about Abraham a little bit. He's a fantastic researcher, and he gave us a framework for considering communications culture, which I constantly go back to. So for those who don't know Maslow, essentially he argues that we all have needs. We have biological needs, we have safety needs. The biological need is, the need to feed yourself and have a good air supply, all the way up to safety. You're not going to get eaten by wild beasts. You need to belong, and you need to feel good about yourself, and you need to have intellectual pursuits that make you feel that you can become ultimately self-actualized, and eventually you find yourself sitting at the royal box at Covent Garden watching the Nutcracker just about to ascend to the 9th astral plane. To my way of thinking, an understanding of this from leaders would then begin to allow them to think about what they're saying, when they're saying it, and whether anybody's actually listening to what they're saying. And I've got a little example of where this can sometimes be somewhat dysfunctional. And in order to show these particular group of leaders, we use the humble Wordcloud. Now, I don't know if everybody's familiar with the Wordcloud, I imagine. You produce a set of text, you pour it into a little mathematical algorithm, and it produces a proportionately larger word for the more frequent times that you use that word in your content. So here is the leader's town hall content poured into a Wordcloud generator. Wordle.net doesn't cost anything off the internet. And these were the things that this group of leaders were talking about. The vision, the future of the company, making money, and generally looking at the far horizon of a wondrous commercial environment. But the people who are actually in the audience, whose content we also poured into a Wordcloud generator, they were thinking really about other things, like their job, their personal development, whether they had any kind of future at all. Now, Wordclouds are interesting. They're really interesting because they're very simple, but they give you a perspective on content, that is to say, words and notes, which you wouldn't otherwise get. And it just gives you a snapshot of something. It doesn't tell you the truth of something, but it gives you something that's interesting in its own right. So if I could maybe pop along here, this is the Wordcloud of the top 10 lyrics of the top 10 pop songs being sold throughout the world in February, some week, I think the first week in February. And you can see what people are concerned with here. They're going out, they're finding, some people are thinking about nothing, they're probably the guys, and then you've got You've got, oh yeah. So there's definitely something happening out there in that particular demographic. But if we look at the next one, a week later, things have changed slightly. Bye, baby, stagger home, and it's obviously involves some girl called Donna. Now, I've got to an age where I want to talk about religion and politics increasingly, to be honest with you. I think I've just stopped doing small talk. So I want to talk about, I think, politics first of all. So let's consider word clouds in the arena of politics. So if we could have a look at a word cloud. This is Sarah Palin's word cloud from the 2008 vice presidential elections. The speech that she gave, the debate that she had with her counterpart Joe Biden on the other side. I would argue that, and perhaps somewhat counterintuitively some people would say, Sarah demonstrates discipline, she speaks appropriately about her candidate, and she shows structure through the medium of this word cloud that was there on the night when I watched the debate. She was actually very impressive relative to Joe Biden, who spent most of his time whittering on about the guy at the top of the other ticket, thereby breaking a basic rule of politics: do not mention your opponent's name. Joe couldn't stop mentioning John McCain throughout the presentation. Now, it doesn't tell you any truth. It doesn't give you any insight into who was going to be a better debater, or who would have been a better vice presidential candidate. I don't think there's an algorithm that exists that would truly explain American politics to anybody. But as a word cloud, it's an interesting snapshot, I would say. So, moving along, look at our near neighborhood of planets, Pluto, Mercury, Mars, and Venus. And you get a sense that, you know, the Earth in its near neighborhood is a pretty big deal. It's got color and shape, and it's really very important. And then we go to the next sort of neighborhood, and we find that we're actually pretty titchy relative to the rest of the planets. And then if we go even further out and we consider the sun, we discover that we're even titchier than we ever thought we were against our own sun that rises and sets on ourselves every day. And then finally, if we look at the last slide here, you find that the sun has been relegated to 1 pixel versus Antares here on the far end. And Antares isn't even the biggest star. There's a star out there called VY Canis Majoris, which is so large that to fly from one side to the other in a plane traveling at 500 miles an hour will take you 550 years. See, secretly I'm a mathematician. So, do you see what I did there? I decided to abandon my content and rush us out to the furthest ends of the universe, and I got away with it with 4 visual slides. And that's something else that I want to talk to my leaders about. Visualize things. They're infinitely more impactful than words. They're infinitely more impactful than data sets, which is what leaders tend to cling on to. So, my argument is make the data come alive, and do so through a true miracle called tree mapping. Now, tree mapping's been around for a long time. It's been a mathematical preoccupation for decades, and the idea is that you write an algorithm that allows you to present data in geometric shapes and forms, typically squares and rectangles. And in fact, it's given us a new verb, to squarify, which I really love. I'm going to now squarify some data for you. So let's have a look at some squarified examples. These are the casualties from some of the major wars conducted in possibly the most bloodthirsty century ever experienced by the human condition. And the first thing that strikes me about this is that World War I and World War II were quite similar in terms of their deaths. But if you look on the other side, the Eastern Front of World War II, you know, what happened in the Balkans and Russia during World War II, there were more deaths there than in all of these other wars in the bottom right-hand corner. Now, what I'm trying to do with this is make a point. I'm hijacking tree mapping, putting an algorithm in data, and making a point about something. And I think that can be very, very impactful. And I want leaders to sit up and pay attention to that. They don't always necessarily have to be the best talker. They don't always necessarily have to be the best presenter. But they certainly could borrow some Web 2.0 magic. So this is another one which I personally quite like. The world's largest photo libraries. You can see here the little gray square is the Library of Congress. Instagram is significantly bigger, and Flickr is obviously significantly bigger again. But check out Flickr versus Facebook in terms of a repository for photographic information. Now, I could have showed you numbers, but I'd much rather show you a picture to make my point. Okay, so if I give you a real-world example, one of our customers every 3 months had to present a set of data to his leadership team. And his leadership team was very keen to ignore his pre-reads the previous night. They'd relegate him to 5 minutes at the end of the 2-hour session. And there was no two ways about it. He was not really being paid attention to by the important subject of budgeting and spending, which he felt was important. So what we did is we swept all of his stuff away, and we produced a tree map. And the tree map is as follows. Each little dot represents one of 450 projects being done by that leadership team and execute on behalf of this Fortune 100 company. The size of the dot represents the spend, how much money was being spent on that project, and the totality of all the dots taken together represents the entire spend, $300 million, 456 projects. I can't remember the exact numbers. The bottom line is that the colorations are the strategic bucket, if you will, into which those were supposed to be placed. The entire 2-hour meeting was dominated by this one slide, and they call it the caviar slide now in that customer. And it's quite interesting because you can immediately notice certain things about it. The reduction of cost in the business is what we're spending the most money on. A little bit of paradox there, don't you think? So my feeling about this is that, you know, why produce data when you can produce pictures that mean something and allow you to make a point about what you're talking about. So, with that in mind, consider this. Looks a little bit different from the traditional Mercator projection, but what we're looking at here is the world's land masses relative to each other country by country. And it's just a way of presenting information. And I think it's inherently interesting because it sort of redresses the balance in our minds of a northern hemisphere that is very big and dominant with Britain and right in the middle of it, and then a slightly less important southern hemisphere because it doesn't really, the continent seem unusually small in Mercator. This redresses that considerably by presenting us a more accurate picture of landmass. But what if we could plug in data that was different, that was more valuable and insightful for certain conditions of economic and social development? This is per capita income, absolute wealth. So you can see that the northern hemisphere is indeed very well off and very wealthy and really quite obese. But here at the bottom in the southern hemisphere, you know, income is frankly less preoccupying. People simply don't have a lot of it. And that tells you a story about a world in which you live, which is very impactful, and it's got very little to do with geography or raw data, but it's more to do with what the story of the world actually is. And if we take the same information and we reconfigure it again, and we say, let's have a look at malaria deaths, all of a sudden North and South American continents practically evaporate and leave us with an African continent challenged by huge disease and medical problems, which would hugely inhibit its capacity to compete and to grow like we in the northern part and in the West have been able to achieve. So pictures are very powerful. I bet that's the only thing you'll remember from my whitterings here today, is that one thing. And that would be my point entirely. And if you can, provide a visual reference. Don't talk about things or present numbers. Provide a visual reference. And for that, I'm going to use one of the sister cities of Aberdeen, which is Houston in Texas. I'm going to talk a little bit Houston. And if I can perhaps look at this, there are 1.9 million people in Houston, but there are also 1.9 million people in 1978 in Manhattan. So we've placed Manhattan Island on the surface of Houston to give you an idea of the size and scale of that city. For those of you who know Houston, the 610 loop is there. Manhattan would fit very, very neatly inside it. How do you go about governing a city, providing resources for a city when it's got that type of scale? And where it's possible, if we can move on, don't do what every leader does, do death by PowerPoint. Now, I have to tell you that in my time as a communicator, I've witnessed execution by PowerPoint. 50 or 100 slides substituting for leadership. And it ain't good enough. It's simply not good enough. So let's consider the next slide, which again deals with our city in Texas. So here we have the growth of the city in 1960, 1.2 million. And what happens is that it begins to tell a time story of how that city has grown physically, because the size of the pie chart's getting a little bit bigger, the size of the pie, but also how the respective documented different cultures inside that city have also grown and proportionately referenced each other with that growth. So, in conclusion, everybody has a hero. I have a professional hero. That's Lee Iacocca, the man who gave us the Ford Mustang, God bless him, and rescued Chrysler possibly twice in his life. I've never met this man, but I really like his style, and he talks about leadership and he talks about communications a lot. He thinks that all of these characteristics should attach himself to being a leader. But he also said that all of the executives that he grew up with in his career were as good as he was, but he was just a better communicator. So as far as I'm concerned, a leader must communicate, as my final slide will tell you. And now I leave the stage before you lose the will to live. Thank you very much.